My name is Kaylee Pierce, and today I would like to discuss how I believe a brownfield site can be transformed into a permaculture city. By analyzing case studies of community developments that incorporated either a form of sustainable living or is developed on a brownfield site, I was able to determine what defines a permaculture-driven community development. First, I would like to discuss what is a mixed-use community. And that's an area zoned to incorporate residential and community development into the built environment to provide a work, live, and play neighborhood. Next, I would like to define what sustainable living means, and that's a style of living that practices a reduction of an individual and/or society's use of natural resources. Next, I would like to dive into what community development density looks like. And currently the new urbanism guidelines for high density is 30 to 35 units per acre. Now comparing that to the current United States average, you can see that there is a definite difference. And then I also threw in the Salt Lake City Metro as a secondary or another comparison to show as well, just to see that what is current in the United States is not quite up to what the guidelines are suggesting. So based off of this graph, I decided to go with a medium or average density goal of 20 units per acre. Now, to dive in more on like what is permaculture and how to define that, it's a design principle focused on thinking, stimulating, or utilizing patterns and features in natural ecosystems, and this is usually exhibited through food production. And then finally, just what is a brownfield site? And that's a former industrial or commercial site where future use is affected by real or perceived environmental contaminations. Now, with further research of permaculture and specifically food production, I was able to determine that a family of 4 requires about 9,200 calories of garden produce annually. This equals to be about 44 hundredths of an acre of garden space to meet those production requirements. Now looking at a single family residential lot at a half acre, here you can see that a majority of the yard is dedicated to the garden space. I selected Salt Lake City, Utah as my thesis location for a variety of reasons, but I would say the major reason is that during my summer internship here, I was able to learn why the population is growing so fast, and that is the culture of the city, and I'll explain that in a few more minutes. So looking at a map of the metropolitan, you're able to see that it is surrounded by natural landforms. To the east and the west are 2 major mountain ranges that provide a picturesque backdrop within the city. Another major landform is the Jordan River, and along this river is an impressive 100-mile network of paved trails that connect to hundreds of parks throughout the city. And then also I would like to touch here is the transportation that the city has already set up, and it offers a commuter train that runs through the metro, and then from that is a light rail train that connects to the commuter train and then takes the passengers to different parts of the city. Now, the brownfield site that I selected is located in the city of Midvale. And as you can see, my site is bordered by the Jordan River. And within that is also one of the trail systems that I was previously talking about. And my site's also adjacent to the I-15, which is a major freeway that runs north and south through the metro. And my site is located about a 15-minute drive south of downtown Salt Lake City. So it's definitely still considered to be in the heart of the metropolitan. Now I would like to discuss further why I believe Salt Lake City is the perfect location for my thesis site. First, the natural elements. The Salt Flats, it's located about an hour drive west of the city, and then the Wasatch Mountain Range is the border on the east side. And then finally, again, the Jordan River runs through the city. Now, Salt Lake City really started growing from the connection of the Transcontinental Railroad. And with the railroad brought the mining industry. Again, with the city being surrounded by two mountain ranges, it only made sense that the mining industry came and explored those ranges. And then with the current growing economy and population, Salt Lake City now is an inland port, and then a huge tech industry has started to grow there as well. There are a lot of physical elements or activities that you can do surrounding the city, mountain biking, hiking, and then just those winter sports are within an hour of the city. And then finally, the culture. During the summer, on the weekends, there's a farmer's market in every park or an outdoor concert and festivals. And with those festivals, there is always a huge portion dedicated to just public art and local public art. And then also, finally, I was able to experience through my internship this summer just the desire for organic produce that the residents are growing in their backyards. Now moving on to my site history itself. So from 1871 to 1958, the site was used for an ore smelting plant, and this was owned by the Sharon Steel Corporation. From 1958 to 1986, this plant was transformed into a wastewater treatment, and again, it was located on my site. And then from 1991 to 2006, my site was labeled a National Superfund by the EPA, and it became a cleanup priority. And then currently the site is under construction for the Bigham Junction mixed-use redevelopment plan. Now I would like to discuss the analysis on my site. First, looking at the roads and how they are connected through and around. Also here you're starting to see that Salt Lake is built on a grid system. And then with the roads comes the public transportation. There's a light rail track line that runs to the northwest side of my site, and then the commuter train line runs along the I-15 freeway just east of my site. And also you can see that there are multiple bus routes and stations surrounding my site as well. So taking the roads and the public transportation, I was able to determine the major access points I wanted to incorporate in my site. So looking at vehicle access points, and then also bike access points from the existing Jordan River Trail. Now, looking at this density surrounding my site is also a major part in determining my design. So as you can see, there's an industrial zone to the southeast corner, and then just north of that is single-family residential housing at about 3.8 units per acre. And these houses, I would say, were built around the 1980s. Now, there's also a business district, and this area reminds me of a small town downtown area. The buildings are about 2 stories tall, and just very mom and pop kind of shops in this area. And then there is a multifamily residential housing to the north of my site, and this is 17 units per acre. And these houses or buildings were built within the last 10 years. After looking at the surrounding density of my site, I determined that this mixed-use zone or high density zone should be located in this area. And then the lower density or residential zone should be adjacent to where the existing single family residential houses are. This was designed or created to try to create an easy transition between the surrounding densities and zoning that currently exists. I also determined that I wanted to maintain and enhance this vegetative buffer that runs along the Jordan River. And within this buffer is also that existing bike trail. And if I enhance this vegetative buffer, it'll only make that bike trail's experience that much better for the users. There's also an industrial swale located in this portion of my site, and this was formed through the history and different stages that my site has gone through. And then finally, just looking at the ideal location for where permaculture or the permaculture aspect can fit in. So after looking at my existing site analysis and at my limiting 280 acres, I determined that the 15 acres of the Jordan River vegetative buffer will be preserved. And then again, with the 280 acres, I did a stormwater calculation. And to be able to hold all the precipitation that occurs on my site in a 100-year storm event, I would need to have 36 acres dedicated to just a stormwater holding system. So with the remaining acreage, I was able to, through a mix of calculations, decide that 120 acres of infrastructure would allow to still have enough permaculture garden space with 88 acres. And then with the 120 acres of the infrastructure, I would need to have 20 acres set aside for a wastewater system or wastewater filtration system. And then the remaining acreage will go towards community parks. So looking at the existing infrastructure, I'm able to propose 10.7 units per acre, and this will allow me to feed a fourth of the garden produce that's required for my site annually. Landscape performance goals, I would like to transition into my big moves. And from there, again, I want to increase my density from existing of 0.08 units per acre to 10.7 units per acre. I again also want to incorporate a permaculture link to a drainage swale or a stormwater filtration system. I want to convert the existing industrial swale into my wastewater treatment wetland. And then again, preserve the Jordan River vegetative buffer. And then finally, I would also like to provide access to the local or surrounding public transportation. So now looking at my master plan for my site. Again, with the density surrounding my site of the mixed family, mixed use residential housing area and the single family residential housing area, and also the vehicle access points of my site analysis, my roads started to take shape, and then also the blocks and just how my buildings are to be laid out. And then next was the water systems that I'm able to or want to propose. Again, to be able to accommodate all the wastewater that will occur on my site, I needed 20 acres of a wastewater treatment wetland system. And then also to accommodate for that 100-year storm event, I needed 36 acres of a stormwater filtration system. and then with infill of my parks, and then the remaining 88 acres towards my permaculture gardens. And as you can see, the gardens went from being incorporated just in the infill to also being included within the different housing areas as well. And then finally, I'm going to propose a trail system that connects to the existing, and this is going to be a permaculture interpretive trail, and there's different routes and connections, but all in all it equals 3 miles. So again, here's my master plan, looking at it in almost a diagrammatic form of how my system, different elements have been incorporated and intertwined throughout. So looking at just how my density is laid out, first I want to start with the mid-rise apartments, and this density for the area is 40.6 units per acre. I'm proposing these buildings to be a 5-story apartment style buildings with permaculture gardens or parks, green space for the communities that live within there to be used. Also, my row house density. This is looking to be at about 12.5 units per acre. This system allows for a little bit more private space, but then it's still also in a tighter density community. My apartment house density is sitting at about 19.8 units per acre, and this is looking more towards a traditional house, but maybe a little larger scale or a more townhome type of feel. And then finally, the single family housing, and that density is set at 5.3 units per acre and allows for a majority or the most private space within that system for these residents. So looking at this density, I'm able to propose 3,015 units with an average of 10.8 units per acre for my whole site. So now I would like to start looking at how my actual housing is laid out in these little diagrammatic bubbles. First, we're starting to look at the mid-rise apartments and just how that system is laid out. Here we're looking at on-street parking will be provided along with a garage parking so that there's adequate spots provided for this high density area. And then again, here you can see that there are some spaces set aside for gardens and then other spaces set aside for that community interaction. And then this is showing another kind of plaza space that could be incorporated between the different buildings. Next, we're moving to the row house diagram, and this shows that again we're providing on-street parking but also individual garage parking so that for the individual they feel like they have their own space. And then once we get to the backyard, you'll see that each unit will have a small backyard for their own use along with their private permaculture. And then you'll see here there is community permaculture provided where they're able to kind of pick and select what they're growing. And then in the center is also community green space. Now looking at the apartment houses, this has the least amount of green space provided, but then we're also still being able to maintain the required permaculture gardens that are necessary to meet that production level that we are trying to achieve. So here we have just a parking lot and then permaculture gardens surrounding the site. And then finally, we're moving on to the single family residential housing. And this is your more traditional kind of style of living that's going to be proposed in this thesis. But also, once we move to the backyard, you'll see that there is still an amount of space that is dedicated to just the permaculture gardens. So the yards are smaller than traditional, but then also within the back system, there's a trail system for walking, biking, and then also orchards and or just more garden space can be added within that system. This diagram here shows how I plan to utilize that collected stormwater on site. So when a storm event occurs, the water then gets filtrated into the stormwater filtration system, which will be filled with plants that are perfect for this ideal situation. And then as the water gets moved through the site, it'll be transitioned into a storage facility that'll be located underground. And then from there, a water pump will turn on and irrigate the permaculture gardens as needed. And throughout my site, I have different types of irrigation proposed. Right here, I'm showing a center pivot irrigation system, but I also am proposing underground irrigation. And then just in certain areas, there also will be greenhouses for the produce that the site needs year round and cannot be preserved throughout the year. The next major system that I would like to discuss is the plant selection that went into this program. So I have various spaces that I've selected plants for, and those plants were selected for a primary purpose of sustainability. And we'll dive into those further. So first I want to talk about the parks, trails, kind of planting palette here that you're looking at. These plants were selected because they have a high tolerance to the urban environment, and then they also can handle drought well too. So for those dry years, the plants aren't going to be dying. These plants were also selected or identified for this system because of their aesthetic appeal. Within the different parks on my site, I want to be able to have year-round color, aesthetic, and just different features that will help make the parks a lively place and an enjoyable place to be in. Next, I want to talk about the permaculture trails on my site. And throughout the interpretive permaculture bike trail, you'll find orchards, and then also just the traditional kind of farm style large plantings. And the thought process for this system is that as the people move along the trail, I want it to be an educational element for them to learn how food goes from the garden to their plates as well. So this is the more educational element on my project. Next is the Jordan River Trail system. So this is where I want to preserve that existing vegetative buffer. So a huge part of this sustainable selection for these plants were to make sure that they were all native, non-invasive species, but then also adding the eastern redbud in there to add a pop of color in the spring and just have some aesthetic appeal to make this part of the trail system desirable for not just the people on my site, but for the whole Salt Lake City, Utah community. And then finally, along the stormwater trail system, here you're going to find the plants that have a more fibrous root system and will help filtrate the water as it gets moved through. So here you're finding more plants that can handle a higher amount of water, but then they're also able to withstand a drought system for those dry years. But again, just the large sustainable factor on making sure that they can live and thrive in this environment while also filtrating and cleaning that water as it gets moved through the system. Next, I would like to talk about kind of the further design development of my site. And the concept I chose for this is connecting the canyons. So again, going back to the natural environment of the mountains surrounding my site, and then just going back to the history on how the Transcontinental Railroad ended up making Salt Lake City what it is today, and just how that connection of the railroad was able to bring such a huge economic factor to this location of the United States. So for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about a centralized park that I selected in my development, and I decided to take this into further design detail just so you're able to understand the style that I'm going for and just the different level of program elements that will be included throughout the whole project. There just isn't enough time for me to go into this detail on my whole site. So one of the major elements I want to include are children parks throughout, and this is just vital within when you're looking at a community development. There needs to be a safe place for children to play. Next, I want to have like some large feature that draws people into the park. This is an element that I feel like will just help make this community a desirable place to live. Also, I want to incorporate the historic elements on my site, and then through that have like a community gathering space or pavilion. I want to be able to have multiple amphitheaters, stage elements, different spaces where those outdoor concerts or festivals can happen throughout my site as well, you know, tying back into that Salt Lake City culture. And then incorporating a marketplace for the residents to be able to go and pick up the produce that's grown on the larger permaculture garden areas, so they don't have to go into the garden system themselves and pick the produce. And then also, since I'm incorporating mixed use or commercial buildings, there also needs to be a space for those employees to go and take a break and enjoy and just enjoy being in the great outdoors. Next, I want to design for year-round use, and I felt the best way to do that is to incorporate a plaza that could be intertwined or reused in the winter with an ice skating rink. And then Salt Lake City, they have a huge population they focus on art, and that's their drive, and I wanted to be able to design for local art pieces to be featured within these spaces as well. And then adding a shopping district restaurant, creating a space that'll bring people to my site that might not live there or in the surrounding area, but then almost creating a destination. And then finally, still incorporating that stormwater filtration system throughout. So now kind of looking into programming on how this park kind of starts to take shape. And then looking at square footage of what would be required for these elements at such a large community development. And this is kind of what I came up with. Some of the program elements that went into getting this design to where this image is showing are, I wanted to create a sloping amphitheater lawn. This lawn can be used for multifunction, but then also a great space for people to go and enjoy a concert. Also, I wanted to have a large enough space to accommodate food trucks and vendors for those weekend marketplace activities, but then also have different festivals hosted here as well. And then I wanted to have some dramatic shape of my pavilion, and I went towards an arc just because I felt this was the best to be able to frame the mountain backdrop. Also, in this art pavilion lawn space, I wanted to incorporate almost rooms, and I formed those by using planting beds. And then finally, a sloping lawn with a restaurant located beneath. I thought this was just a unique element, and then the food made in the restaurant can be taken from the produce that's produced on my site. And then looking at kind of how the housing surrounds the space. So I have single family residential housing, which is just a 2-story building to the one side, which has and then the row houses to the other. And these are a little taller, so you're able to see a little bit further while in those buildings. Then behind those are the mixed-use apartments, which are 5 stories and one of the tallest buildings proposed on this site. And then finally, my mixed-use buildings are also 5 stories, and this is where the commercial hub will be, where the different stores, restaurants, office buildings, and space use will be incorporated. So this plan view of my park starts to show more of those program elements that I decided to incorporate within this park itself. So I have a sledding hill that will be sloped lawn in the summer, but then children are able to sled down in the winter, and then a play park for the children as well. I also am proposing a salt plaza space, which is inspired by the salt flats that are located just an hour away from my site, and then having a sculpture lawn where local artists can showcase their work and the different elements they've been working on as well. So the first section I would like to cut through on this plan is going through the water park and the salt plaza. And here in this section, you're able to kind of see how those spaces are formed with sunken elements that during the 100-year storm event turns into a holding filtration system for the storm water. But then there are also plaza spaces for children to play or you to meet your friends and family before you explore the rest of the site. The next section I want to cut through is of the business plaza itself. For the business plaza, again, it's sunken to be able to accommodate for that 100-year storm event, but then also it creates this intimate space, and that was the main goal for this design. And I wanted to incorporate a cantilever bench and planting beds around the space to only, again, try to create an intimate and enjoyable space for its users. The next and final section cutting through this site is going to be just of the street itself. And then here we can see again how that stormwater will be infiltrated from the street and then transported throughout my site. Also, there was programming put in on the street itself to be able to have a lane of traffic with parking, on-site parking, and then giving those bicyclists a protected lane and adding that curb in there as well. And then programming the sidewalk too to have a furniture zone, pedestrian zone, and then finally that store frontage zone. And then also here you're able to see kind of how the commercial buildings will be laid out with retail, office, hotel, and then apartments on top to really take advantage of those great views. Now, I would like to kind of show some visions of what I foresee these spaces being. And starting off with the business plaza, again, I want it to be an intimate space comfortable, crafted, but then also complex. So within the design, I'm able to create almost little rooms or spaces for people to sit and enjoy their time. But then also it can be a meeting space or a place to conduct a meeting at. And then this view that we're looking at, you can start to see some of the different other program elements in the background while looking at the plaza in this foreground. Next, I would like to discuss my sculpture lawn. And again, this is a space that I foresee future artists or local artists of the site being able to showcase their work. And one of the major features or driving factors in this design is that I wanted to create lawns that are almost rooms, and that will be accomplished through planting. So looking at one of the sculpture pieces in this lawn, you're able to kind of see how those rooms are beginning to be formed. And then also on the right side of the screen, you're seeing this granite stone wall that holds the sledding hill to the back, but then it has also became a art piece as well for this site. Another angle looking into the space, just showcasing how those planting beds will create that room sense, and then getting another angle or view of this granite stone art sculpture wall. Next, I would like to talk about the water park, the children's water park, and this is a really fun space to design. And I wanted to make sure that it was bustling, but then also small enough that parents felt safe to have their kids in there and let their kids run around and play. And then just since it's for the kids, it had to be colorful, so just adding that colorful element. So here you're able to see a part of this water park area. It's sunken again to allow for the stormwater, 100-year stormwater event, but then by adding different water features, different water types of play, and then that pop of color is just something that makes this water park play area very unique to itself. Now I would like to talk about the Salt Plaza and then also the pavilion that's located behind it. The idea for this design space was to create a area for people to congregate and meet, but then also I wanted it to still be fun and playful. And I used the salt flats that's located not far from my site as design inspiration for this area. Here, this image, you can see how that inspiration starts to take shape, having a pink dusted asphalt to kind of mimic what the salt flats look like during a sunset, and then also by adding that reflecting pond, which then gets transformed into the ice skating rink in the winter. And looking at how the pavilion kind of the arc form is able to shape the view of the mountains, but then create a fun space for the users to utilize. And then next I want to talk about the rail lawn, and this is a more intimate space again, but it's programmed to be adjacent to a shopping area. And I wanted it to be kind of bustling and charming, but then just feel fresh as well. So here we're looking at storefront to the left of this screen, but then a grass lawn to the right. And this space will incorporate movable seating for the users that just need to take a break from their shopping experience, but then it also allows for more intimate conversations to happen and occur. And then also by incorporating concrete steps to show a more defined barrier of where the rail lawn ends and the concert lawn begins. And this just helps with different programming and different elements and activities that will partake within the space. Now I want to discuss the marketplace, and this is one of my favorite parts of the design, having this vibrant but spacious and bustling area where people will come and get their produce for the week that was grown on site. It's just such a fun and exciting location. So here you're seeing the marketplace with set up vendors, almost with the scene looking like there's some type of festival happening in this space. It's again large enough for food trucks to come in and park and then serve the users on the site. And then also by incorporating elms and having the large cathedral branching will open up the space but then provide shade, so then in the heat of the summer the space is still enjoyable for all users. As we're watching this space kind of unfold in front of us, again, I want to remind you that it's the Salt Plaza, but in the winter months where the reflecting pond is turned into a skating rink. And then we're looking at the pavilion almost at a dusk kind of lighting. So then you're able to see that the space can be used year round and during all hours of the day and night as well. And that was a major factor for me when I was designing this space. I wanted it to be for the community and at their convenience. And just, I wanted it to be such a fun and exciting place for people to gather and use. And I feel like it reflects that as well, along with showing what the Salt Lake City culture is like too. And as we kind of see the ending of this video, I would just like to, again for you to reflect on the previous discussion we had about that culture and just the outdoor driven desire for the population to use and experience. And with that, I would like to open up to any questions.